Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inside Leather History, a Fireside Chat. I'm Doug OKeeffe. I'm the host and the producer of these chats, which are a program of the Leather Archives and Museum. Today is Saturday. It's October 19th, 2024, and I'm sitting down with Madian Al Jazerah. Did I correctly pronounce your name?
You did. You
Ah,
did.
wonderful.
Yes.
Okay. And Madian is in Amman, Jordan. Now, this is a very special chat, and I'm going to tell you why. The interview with Madian marks a special moment in that this is the 31st international country represented by the Fireside Chats. And this is the first Fireside Chat from the Arab world. I am very honored and I'm very, very excited about this. Who knew I'd be able to bring the chats to the Arab world? Or bring them online anyway. And I'd like to thank you, Madian, for making this very special moment available to us. I'm
Thank,
grateful.
thank you. It's my pleasure.
Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and start here. When we were preparing for this interview, you mentioned that we're doing this chat during a politically charged time, a little bit of a difficult time. Tell me what you mean, please.
Definitely a politically charged time. I mean, just look at what's happening around the world.
Hmm.
We've got the war in Ukraine, we've got the war in Gaza, now up to Lebanon. And it's not really about the war as much as it's about justice and how, it totally applies to us as an LGBTQ I plus community. If there's no justice, there's no peace, and this applies to us. This applies to the whole global community. This is where equality kicks in. This is where our rights and that's what we're asking for: similar rights to everybody else. And this is all at stake because justice, in general, is not being served. There are occupations, there are invasions, there's a genocide going on, and all for different reasons, such as race, religion,
Yeah.
and what's to say it won't be against sexual orientation as well. So this is our cause just as much as it is anybody else's cause. So yes, the timing is very appropriate.
Elaborate a little bit more how that specifically applies to Jordan, because Jordan's sort of caught in the middle of a lot of this.
Yeah, every time any war goes on in the Middle East, we get affected. Jordan's probably the only neutral country in the Middle East. So regardless of all the wars that have gone around, there's been the invasion of Kuwait, which I'm a product of, in terms of being a refugee. There's been the war in Iraq. That's just right next door. I mean, Jordan borders Iraq, Syria. We all know there's been the Syrian war as well. We also border Israel on the west side, and we border Saudi on the south side. And any little skirmish affects us. It affects our tourism. It affects the tourism industry. It affects the economics of the country, and it affects the livelihood, our livelihood in the country.
In watching the news a bit, I've seen coverage where missiles have been flying over Jordan, and this that has to be unnerving.
You know, just last week, was it? No, about 2 weeks ago, when Iran fired the missiles um, at Israel, we, I was sitting at home and I could hear these, like pressure bombs from a distance. And then I realized there were too many of them because at first I thought they were just fireworks. And I
Uh,
walked out on my terrace. I even posted it. Walked out on my terrace and I saw all of these like hundreds of missiles flying over Jordan. So this is, long distance missiles, which we could see clearly. And then we started to see the interceptions of that. So that's really close. That's really close and very, very scary. But that's what we go through here in the Middle East. And although it's flying up above, I think there are a couple of shrapnels that fell somewhere on the borders, but we're still safe, and thank God, nothing's happened to us.
How do you, as a civilian in the country, how do you prepare? What do you do?
You don't, I mean, what do we do? Uh, we know the politics of the area come with a very long, not so fair history. This is an area that's been colonized, and people love to use that word, colonies, you know,
Yeah.
not realizing that colonies are just occupied spaces. And what are occupied spaces? They are oppressed spaces where the peoples of those countries are oppressed, the peoples of these countries are robbed, the peoples of these countries have their identities stripped off of them. And I think this interview has a lot to do with identity as well. When we talk about ourselves as a community, identity is a very, very important factor. And it's not just, it's just not our sexual identity. There's a lot more. Where do we come from? Who are we? Where were we born? So it's a lot bigger. It's a lot
Yes.
bigger than just a few rockets flying over.
Yes. Yes. Well, I hope everyone in Jordan stays safe. I can't imagine living under something like that going on. That it's mind-boggling.
I hope all civilians, regardless of nationality, race, or religion, are safe.
Hmm.
It's politics at war, and civilians are the ones who pay the price.
True. True. But in speaking of the Arab world and Middle East and everything, you've moved around to a few places that you've said gives you a bit of an identity crisis. Now, I'd love to know what you mean by that.
Um, it's well, I mean, I'm Palestinian. I am originally a Palestinian.
Okay.
And for those who don't know where Palestine is where Israel is right now. So, of course, people have different views of that.
Yes.
My view is it's Palestine, and we were occupied, and we were given away from an occupier like the British. And I don't want to point fingers, but that's what happened. We were robbed of our country by another country and given to another entity.
Okay.
So right there's an identity crisis. So I am Palestinian. My parents are Palestinian. My grandparents are Palestinian. My ancestry is all Palestinian. But I don't have a Palestine. There is no Palestine. Palestine is occupied. So the crisis starts right there. But then I was born in Kuwait because my parents became refugees and went off to Kuwait. So being born in Kuwait, there's no birthright. So I'm not Kuwaiti. So I don't have a permanent residency. I can never claim that will ever be my home because I don't have birthright to it. Now, luckily enough, I carry a Jordanian passport, which, as a child growing up in Kuwait, because I was born and raised there for a bit, when we traveled, and we traveled a lot, I would carry, I would use my Jordanian passport. And the number of times I remember asking my dad or my mom was like, what is Jordan? Because I had no idea what that was. I'd never been there. So here I am, I'm being appointed a paper document and have every official in the world call me a Jordanian. And I'm thinking, what is that? Because it was just a piece of paper for me then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and then and I went to British schools growing up. That's another one. So my mathematics was in pounds and pence, and the whole history of any subject that I had within a British school was of Great Britain. So there's another identity that I had to deal with. And then, of course, there's the religion, and I was born Muslim. I belong to a Muslim family. But at the age of 59, the Islam that I grew up with has nothing to do with the Islam that I see now. The Islam I grew up with was fun and loving, very heavily cultured, religion, our women were not covered. There was no covering and there was no hijab in Islam then.
Do you mean
So,
only in Jordan, or do you mean
no, worldwide now, we see the hijab. I only saw the hijab the first time in my life. I saw hijab, I was 19. So there
I
was
guess
no
where
hijab.
I'm confused a little bit because are you speaking that no hijab in Jordan or
No,
throughout? Oh,
there was no hijab in Islam.
oh, I didn't quite
Yeah,
understand that.
yeah, and there's a history to that as well. And I mention it because that's part of an identity as well. That's part of a very, very strong identity and feminism, and this is something that came up when the Shah lost his throne, was thrown out of Iran at that time, and the Shia movement kicked in, and that was very fanatic. And that was in the 70s, late 70s.
Yes.
And then at the same time in Saudi Arabia, you had the Wahhabis kick in, and that's where I feel my Islam was being robbed. So we were robbed of our Islam and pushed and forced into a fanatic Islam. All religions have been robbed. Christianity's been robbed. Judaism's been robbed. We've all been robbed, and that's how things develop. So this is also that affected my identity because I grew up with a mother who taught us that we could pray at churches and synagogues, and that was okay because it's all the house of God, and a mother that wore bikinis and swimsuits and
My gosh.
you know and then suddenly they're telling us Muslims are supposed to be wearing a hijab. So where did that come from? So there's the crisis comes from so many different directions, and then to add on to all of that, you pile up the fact that I'm a gay man. And that's where it becomes even more and more difficult. Shame kicks in. Like any other country, it's a struggle. It was a struggle, still is a bit of a struggle, but we move forward. We fight for our rights. So that's what I mean by identity crisis.
And that's a very big topic.
That's it.
We could go on for days talking
That could
about
go on
that.
for days.
Yeah. Why did you settle in Jordan? What brought you there?
Oh, well, that's I was living in San Francisco. I went to college in
Oh,
America. Uh,
oh,
yes. I actually went to college at the age of 15. I finished my O levels, the GCEs, the British system. And
okay.
as all Palestinians, where it's like you have no country, your only protection in life and your only power in life is a degree.
Okay.
So was pushed to finish my high school by 15. And by like the beginning of my 16th year, I was on a plane out to America to Oklahoma State University to study architecture. So I did that.
Oklahoma.
Yeah, talk about culture shock. But I loved it. Loved it. And anyway, after I graduated, I worked in more than one city, in Boston, in New York, Washington, San Francisco.
Wow.
And in San Francisco, I had a few roommates, and we got gay bashed by four people, by a couple, two couples. And we got gay bashed just a block away from our house coming back from the bars. And we were really, really lucky because those two couples were on drugs and they were coming down the street. And this is on Valencia. And they're coming down the streets and they were very fidgety. And I turned around to my Cypriot roommate. There were four of us. And I tell him, Yanni, don't, whatever they do, just keep walking. And I'm telling everybody, keep walking, whatever they do. And they come right through us. They literally came right through us. And of course, they targeted Yanni. Yanni was this good-looking Greek man, buff, and a threat to any other man. And of course, they went for him. They crossed over and they shouldered Yanni quite hard. And I turned around and I said, Yanni, keep walking. Of course, Yanni would not keep walking.
Mm-hmm.
He turns around and yells back and calls the guys. He uses the N-word. I just couldn't believe he used it. It was horrible. And that was the beginning of the end of my stay in San Francisco. They turned around, they came at us, and I saw the guy put his hand in his pocket, and I thought, oh God, it's a gun. We're dead. But it happened so fast. So when he pulled his hand out, it was actually a brass knuckle. And he quickly punched Yanni in the face. Yanni was on the floor. He was bleeding. I
God.
tried to help out. Another friend of ours, Ben, Jerry, tried to help out. He got kicked. He fell back. And then I thought in my head, one more kick, Yanni's going to be killed. And as the attacker, comes forward again to give a kick at Yanni's face at that time, I pushed him away. And when I pushed him away, I realized how big he was because my hands were literally at his waist. And I got pounded. I just got beat up, broke my ribs, broke my fingers, ended up,
Oh God.
yeah. I laugh now, but it was quite traumatic then.
Absolutely.
But to make a long story short, after 6 weeks of going through surgery, I had to do surgeries to my hand. Didn't have the money because at that time Kuwait was um, occupied. The Iraqis, Saddam Hussein, had walked into Kuwait and occupied Kuwait,
Yes.
so we
Yes.
were homeless again. So there was no money, and I was scrambling at that time. And the only way to get my surgery done was to agree to identify the people who attacked us and join the witness protection program. And when I did that, they started to change my name and wanted to move me to a state with a different name. And that's when I thought, wait a second, why would I do that? My parents at that time had left Kuwait because the war had started there,
Yeah.
and they had moved to Jordan because that's the only place we could go to with our passport, the only
Oh boy.
residency that we had. So they moved there, and I thought, well, rather than change my name and move to another state, let me just go try Jordan out. And that's how I ended up in Jordan.
Wow. Very roundabout. But I have to ask these attackers, if you were going to be covered by the auspices of the Witness Protection Program, they had to be more than just simple street thugs.
No, they were so excited after. I mean, I was just trying to make my story short. They were so excited. And I remember, they were giggling throughout the whole episode. I mean, no, it just never leaves my ears. They were giggling throughout. And when they were, and as we were being attacked, our other friend, Nikos, who's from Greece, he was just stood there. He was in shock for a bit. But then when he kind of woke out of his shock, he started to yell out and say, help, help, somebody help. It's like 1:30 in the morning. And that's when they dropped everything. They stopped hitting. They just dropped us and still giggling and ran down the street. But as they ran down the street, there was a car apparently parked way down near the end of Valencia, closer to Market Street. There was a car that had two Samoans in it, this guy and his girlfriend. And these four came in and apparently put their hands in the other pocket, and that's why I said we were so lucky. The pocket they put his hand in the first time brought out a brass knuckle, but the other pocket had a gun, and he shot the two. So
Oh,
ultimately, he had killed the two. We
oh,
yeah, we saw them come in at the emergency when we were at the hospital, but didn't know that they were connected. And it's later that we found out they were connected. And based on that is me identifying the suspects, being a witness.
I am so sorry. I can't even. Oh God.
It's amazing how a single episode can just turn your whole. I was in America, gonna stay in America. I was feeling American, and then boom, you know, just had to go off on another tangent.
Um, Tell me about going to Amman at that time. What were your feelings, your thoughts, motivations, even going there? after that?
I had, I was just happy to be going to family.
Sure.
So it didn't matter where they were. At that time, they were in Amman. They had just moved to Amman. So I just needed that. And I needed the love of family.
Sure.
And Amman was really, really interesting because when I got to it, it was fascinating how I'm sitting at home, the new home, and I'm looking out the window. And I'm used to in Kuwait, when I'd look out the window, I would see desert. Everything was beige, dust storms, beigey desert, little vegetation. And then here I am in Amman and I'm looking out the window and it's mountains, it's Mediterranean, it's green, olive trees. And then, so you realize you're somewhere else, but the furniture is all very familiar. But then you walk out into the street and then it's like somebody in Kuwait, went to Kuwait, picked up the whole community of non-Kuwaitis and just moved them and dropped them in Amman. So I'd walk out on the street and there were people that I knew.
Oh, wow.
The same people who were selling papers and flowers and gum at the traffic lights in Kuwait were in Amman. And that was very, very strange. And of course, arriving, I had nothing, and we were refugees and didn't know what to do at that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did you fit into, as you've said, a new ID now in Amman?
It was the first time in my life that I was in a country and I carried its passport. So
Wow.
it was for the first time in my life. And mind you, at that time I was like 29, 30. Gosh, about 31. It was the first in 31 years of my life, I've never felt that I was in a place where I belonged, although I had never lived there.
Wow.
Even my parents it's not like my parents even came from there. But we just carried the Jordanian passport because that was part of the political deals that were happening when they displaced Palestinians from Palestine out of the country. They pushed them into Jordan and they were given Jordanian passports.
Wow.
So here I am in a country where I never had to worry about residency, never had to worry about a green card. I had full rights. I was able to vote. I was able to do everything.
Wow.
And that was that was a feeling I never had to add to my identity. Now I was given the opportunity to say I'm Jordanian without just the paper, the passport. I could say I am Jordanian because I actually lived there.
Yes. Wow. That had to be a powerful feeling for you.
It was, I didn't realize how much I needed to feel that I had a space to grow roots.
Yes.
And roots where no one can pull them off. There were, no expired residency, that was it. That was mine.
Yes. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Now, were these rights extended to any immigrants that came into the country at that time?
No, only Jordanians.
Oh,
Only
okay.
Jordanians. But Jordan became, because it's such neutral ground, it became the hub, the refugee hub to many countries. So when we ran out of Kuwait, when my parents ran out of Kuwait, so it received all the Jordanians and Jordanians of Palestinian origin who were from Kuwait. That's
Okay.
one. So suddenly 500,000 people were dropped into Amman, into Jordan. But then
Oh,
at the same time, there were a lot of Iraqi refugees because there was that war about to start, the Gulf War.
yes, yes.
So there was a large influx of Iraqi refugees. Later on, it was an influx of Syrian refugees with the Syrian war. But we also got Lebanese as well. We got Yemenis. We've got Sudanese. So Jordan and Amman in particular became this salad pot different refugees from different countries. It was amazing. It is still amazing because it's
Yes. Yeah.
such a
Yes, but
masala.
I think what I was trying to ask, and I don't know that I said it well, your family was afforded immediate residency passports, but was that extended also to Iraqis or whomever else? Was it
No,
universally applied?
no. It was only not even offered to us. It was a right that we had because we
Yes.
had Jordanian passports.
Wow. Fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating. And let's face it, living in the United States, this is not a concept I really would have known. So, but it we're coming into the more really sort of a lighter side of things here. Jordan does not criminalize homosexuality. The other countries in the Arab world do. What's the difference?
Well, yes, Jordan does not criminalize homosexuality. However, it does not protect either. There are bylaws, very elastic bylaws that are here. Basically, anything that goes against the culture or traditions of the community is considered somewhat illegal. So, if they think, being a homosexual is, or bisexual or trans, it does not fit in with their traditions, then, we become targets. But it's not quite legal. It's just one of those very elastic laws. We're lucky in Jordan because in 1952, they took off the sodomy laws. But I think it's very important to mention that the Middle East and North Africa and Africa were colonized.
Yes.
They're colonized by the British and colonized by the French. Now, we were colonized by the British. So ultimately, they forced their penal codes on
Yes.
all of these countries. And their penal codes were the ones that criminalized homosexuality right from the beginning, right from the get go.
Right.
And all of them could not change or did not change that particular law because it was never brought up. In Jordan,
Hmm.
it was scratched off, and I think that a bunch of us who have done a little bit of homework, we think it's all due to Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia played a very big part in our region, in the deserts of Arabia and Jordan being part of that,
Yes.
and the rest of the Middle East. And he was very much fancied. He was a good-looking dude. God knows what else was going on. But somehow, when this law was looked at in Jordan in 1952, someone must have thought, wait a second, we've all done this. Maybe we should scratch off the sodomy law. But it, this, I think, goes and reflects very much and very well on our culture in the first place. We've never had a homophobic culture. In fact, our deep Arab culture has a lot, has always accommodated homosexuality, is always accommodated trans. There were always very masculine women who dressed up like men within our communities and were very well respected and treated well. And that on the other flip side of that, there were very effeminate men who dressed up like women and hung out with the women and were protected by the women. And even I, growing up,
Hey.
sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I'm fascinated here. What I'm hearing.
I mean, I remember growing up. There were these two women within our community, not even community, within the family. They must have been family members. I think one of them was, but there were these two who had very short hair, who'd let out a bit of the stubble, not stubble, but the hair, the
Yes.
facial hair.
Yeah.
Were always in suits. I remember seeing them dress and undress, and there was none of the, wrapping around their bosoms. to get flat chested. It's as though they were very proud. They were still very proud of their bodies, yet they acted like men. They were very masculine. And that's what I loved about it. And now, in hindsight, I look at it and I think that's the beauty of it, is that they did not have to alter their bodies biologically. They were very proud of it, proud of themselves that way, but they were very masculine. Um, uh, and you know, in the Arab culture, for instance, if a man falls in love with a woman, you know, and the marriage is and they're gonna ask for the hand in marriage, both sides bring their best men and their best women to meet, so that the asking happens there. You know, the men would go and they would ask for the hand of the daughter of the other side, and the women would be separate. And that's, you know, and there's the cup of coffee, and then everything, and then big party goes on. These two women, dressed up as, you know, in the suits, I would always see them with the men. Even at the ceremonies, they would be sitting there with the men, part of the male community, as they asked for the hand in marriage.
Fascinating.
And that absolutely fascinating. It's beautiful.
Yes.
So culturally, it's always kind of been there, and sexuality is very fluid in the Arab world, and I think it's fluid as part of human nature. But the Arab world and the Arab culture allowed that fluidity without judgment for the longest time. In fact, you know, when the love songs that we have, they're always addressed. So many of the love songs are male to male love songs.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Fascinating. Yep. I'm this is just simply fascinating. I hope you realize I'm learning so much from this. But please tell us, let's come over to your shop now. Please tell us about opening books at Cafe, because you said that fascinatingly, the inspiration for this came from a magazine article or an ad or something.
Yes. Yes.
How did this happen? Tell me.
You know, after I got gay bashed in San Francisco, joined a witness protection program, identified I was a witness, and then I had to leave the country. So, and I decided I'd fly back to Amman. So I booked on KLM, Royal Dutch Airlines.
Yes.
So it was San Francisco, Amsterdam, and then Amsterdam, Zurich, Kuwait, Zurich, Amman, Jordan. Yeah. But on that Royal Dutch Airlines, the in-flight magazine, you know, here I am, I'm battered. I had a big cast on my arm, on my wrist and hand. And I'm going through the pages, and at the back of the in-flight magazine, they usually put the ads for places to go, where to eat, where to visit. Yes. in the Netherlands or Amsterdam at that time. And there was an ad for the American Book Center in Amsterdam. Okay. And I looked at it and I thought, you know, I've always wanted to have a bookshop cafe.
Okay.
I didn't want to do architecture. I just wanted a bookshop cafe. I wanted a place for people. So I tore off that page, folded it, put it in my bag. And then 3 years later, ended up wanting to open the Bookshop Cafe. Okay. I just kind of worked it way, you know, when you will something, it happens, and this one did. And when we came to put it together, well, I had already gotten some experience on how to run a restaurant, because I had opened a restaurant just before that.
Oh.
Yes, in a small little Christian hill town in just outside of Amman. And so I knew how to run a restaurant, but we didn't know anything about anything to do with books. Okay. So I thought, and mind you, this is the days before the cell phones came out. And I'm talking to my brother, who's my partner, and we're like, well, what do we do? Who do we ask? And I said, wait. So I run off to my bag. Luckily enough, I hadn't thrown this page that I had torn out. So I pull it out, open it, and look up a number and sent a fax, because there were only faxes then. I sent a fax to Amsterdam, to the bookshop, and I get a phone call back.
Wow, okay.
And on the phone call, this woman calls up and she says, "Where are you guys from?" And I said, "Well, we're actually Palestinian from Jordan." And she's like, "My husband is Palestinian from Jordan." The
Oh,
coincidence, and it turned out that she was married to these two Palestinian Armenians who lived in Jordan. Their parents were in a car accident. They became orphans. They were shipped off to a church, and they were adopted by a Dutch church in Jerusalem,
wow.
and they were raised there. They were so smart and so good at school that they had scholarships to move to Amsterdam, and they
Okay.
studied there. One of them fell in love with an American, and they opened an American bookshop, and they have been our go-to since then till now.
My gosh, fascinating.
Yeah, that was when you sit around and you think, God, send me a sign, and it's like right there in your face.
I um I find fascinating when we were preparing for this chat because you said that Books at Cafe was the first internet cafe in the Middle East and only the sixth in the world. That's a very major designation.
Yeah,
How did this develop?
our one a really good friend of ours who had moved to Amman as well, also Palestinian Jordanian,
Hmm.
had just opened an IT company. And computers at that time were the big, bulky,
Yes, yes.
and
Things. Yeah.
internet had just started. I mean, internet was just come in. I mean, I still use my Yahoo address. And they're the ones who said, "Hey, if we're gonna," he came in as a partner and said, "Wait a second, let's make this a little more special. Why don't we make this an internet cafe?" Of course, I'm like, "What is an internet cafe?" But then I remembered I had been in one in New York,
Okay.
and uh, that's why it's Books at Cafe.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So that came from them. That came from my partner. And we were then, at that time, we were the first internet cafe in the Middle East. We got so much coverage from
Wow.
across the Middle East, so much coverage. And a lot of people didn't know what internet was. So we had a lot of refugees who thought that they used to come in wanting to connect to their families abroad or families back home, thinking it was just a phone line kind of a thing.
Oh,
Um, uh, and I think at that time it was only email by email.
yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how that was. Yeah.
But I can't help but ask, were those original computers on a phone line or, I mean, were they dial up?
They were dial up. So you know that sound that you
Yes.
would always hear. Yeah, that was all day long.
Wow. That is absolutely fascinating. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, that concept exploded as time went on but you were the first.
We were the first. Yep.
Incredible. Now, the location of Booksat Cafe is also significant. You mentioned it's the Greenwich Village of Amman and the oldest neighborhood in Amman. Tell me.
Yes. Uh, I remember. I mean, I didn't know Amman when I got to it, so
Hmm.
I did a lot of walking. And I've always loved this particular neighborhood because it was the oldest.
Hmm.
And it's up on the top of the hill. Amman is seven hills,
Okay.
and kind of like Rome, but these hills all come in a row. And I was on the tip of a peninsula part of this mountain, and it's called the First Circle.
Okay.
So at the First Circle, the road that goes through this little neighborhood is called Rainbow Street. I didn't call it. It just by coincidence. And it used to be like the Rodeo Drive of, in LA. Um,
Okay. I see some things are universal, but all right.
yeah. So very appropriately named.
Yes.
I fell in love with the neighborhood. But this is where all the old aristocracy of Amman started. So King Hussein, which is the current king's father, was born there. and his house is there. And all the old folk there would also, oh yeah, the king, he used to pedal on his little tricycle.
Oh,
They all knew him, knew the family, and their relatives were there, and all of the other families were there. So all the old mansions were there, but they were really, because the city had grown, they all just kind of abandoned these mansions
oh,
and these
sure.
houses and moved onwards because Amman grew, first circle, second, third, fourth, that way, in that direction,
Hmm.
and literally left over the old part. And I remember when I would drive in there, or even walk in there, you just see nothing but cats. All the old shops, or this Chanel shops, were just shut down, dusty, been shut down for years. But
Wow.
I fell in love with it because the fir trees, the olive trees, the lemon trees, the pomegranate tree. They're like out in the street in the bush. It's like being in the bush, but the kind of place where you'd walk and you'd pick your fruits and eat
Yeah.
as you walked by, as you walked through. And I just fell in love with it. Just fell in love with the neighborhood, and I thought this is it because again, the architecture of this neighborhood resembled so much the architecture of where we're originally from, which is Jenin in Palestine.
Okay.
So I have that memory. And then also the memory of the descriptions of houses and whatever from my parents, from
Okay.
their memories of Palestine. This was the closest. So I felt identity wise, that's it. This is where I belong. This has got to be it. And that's how we picked it. That's how we picked the area. We bought two houses with a big piece of land, opened them up on each other, and created Bookshop Cafe.
Excuse me. I don't know if you know this, but a year ago, I went on a bit of a Middle Eastern vacation with my best friend from work. We visited Bookshop Cafe. You were away, and I don't know where you had gone, but we share a mutual friend who thought, when he saw me online somewhere, that I was handsome. I mean,
And you are.
tags, aren't we? But um, honey, and coincidentally, an opportunity came to visit Jordan. Messaged him. He said, "I'm going to take you to my friend's place, the Bookset Cafe." He briefly explained this, and I thought, how fascinating is this? That's how we were introduced. That's how this interview happened. Isn't that amazing?
I love this world. And I love how we're so connected in the strangest of ways.
Even when you don't even know.
And even when you don't even know, but to even make it smaller, just our community, we are so special. Honestly, being part of this LGBTIQ plus community is amazing because it's this immediate link that we have,
Yeah.
regardless if it's sexual or not. But there's always that link because it's a
Yes.
cause. And for this to happen is just fascinating. I
Yeah,
just
it
love
is.
your story on that one.
The moment that he was depicting this, all I saw in my mind was this interview. And I also just want to throw out there that the neighborhood you depicted when you first looked at it, being run down a bit, is not today. It's beautiful now, very well kept, very well built up, very posh looking, actually.
Yeah, people started to move in. Yeah.
But very quickly, fascinatingly, it became a bit of what do you call it? A gathering place for the left of the left. And that's gay people, lesbians, girls that were being forced into arranged marriages, abused children, gay children, people with HIV, LGBTQ refugees. There's this whole list of people. Why did they start gathering there? What was the attraction?
I think it was, and it wasn't just our communities. It was even the leftist of politicians, musicians, artists. It was all of that. It was the left of the Jordanian society, I think, who just felt comfortable. And I think that comfort level came from the way we were. There is me, my brother, the waiters that I that I had hired. We were the first place in Jordan that had Jordanian waiters and waitresses, because usually these are not jobs for Jordanians.
Oh, wow.
We're known to be rough, just not very happy looking people, although one
Oh,
little scratch and we're all smiles.
oh,
I think Jordanians are very, very friendly people.
they are.
But usually these jobs were given to other nationalities.
Okay.
And so we were the first, my place was the first place that offered this to Jordanians, and they all wanted to work for us because I was working there as well. I mean, I wiped tables, I mopped floors, I was in the kitchen, I was out of the kitchen, I was behind the bar, in front of the bar. So because I did everything myself as well, they just wanted to do the same. They felt like I was already giving off unintentionally, giving it, and although it looked friendly, it was very equal. So there was
Oh,
a lot of equality in what I was doing. I
okay.
helped everybody, all my employees. I did their jobs as well with them. So this management pyramid was just flattened without me even trying to. And I think that kind of set a tone, that we're all equal and we're all the same. And that was the attitude that was given. And that gave comfort, not just to the workers. I think it gave comfort to everybody that walked in. And not to mention the books that I used to fly out to Portland, Oregon, and my brother would fly out to Amsterdam to the same bookshop warehouse. And in Portland, I would sit on a crate of books, and I'd literally sit on top, and and literally yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no. I had no
Fascinating.
system. It was just the books that I wanted and the books that I liked. And little did I know that my personality was shaping into that. I didn't even no intention. I just put what I liked. And it turned out all the books that I had were books on equality, on love, on, everything that was equal, um, sexual books. And we had censorship in Jordan. But, the choice of books as well gave another indication to that comfort level.
Sure.
And before you knew it, all of those people who felt they could get help showed up. The gay community showed up. There was no organized gay community,
Hmm.
but a person from here, a person from there, and they would show up, and and I had a few trans people who'd come in, and they were totally received with, with no prejudice whatsoever, but even by the customers. So it just became a very easygoing place. But I did get. This is where I realized that I became an activist, that I'm an activist. I didn't know I was one. But when you start getting people who need the help, and they're bloodied up, or they're bashed, or they're emotionally destroyed, or in fear,
Hmm.
and they come to you, and you help them out, you know, that's labeled activism in a way. I
Yes.
had no idea that's what I was doing, but then I wasn't the only one doing it. Everybody in my cafe was doing it.
Oh,
And that's how we became this established, non-established, officially, um, uh, cafe for everybody, where people, I used to have little talks on HIV to explain what that was and what AIDS was versus HIV.
hmm.
We had these young girls who didn't want to live at home and ran away, and they would be chased by their families, and they'd come to me, help, help. There was all sorts of cases that we had that were just really, and of course there were a lot of refugees that we had. We had a buzzer, so I would hire. Tell me if I'm going off, but we had a buzzer in the cafe, and of course we were not allowed to hire refugees because they didn't have work
Oh,
permits.
sure.
But of course I did. So
Okay.
and all my customers knew that. So every time the Ministry of Labor would come round, their committee would come round. The buzzer downstairs was there were two houses. The bottom house was the bookshop. The top house was the cafe
Okay.
and bar restaurant. So downstairs would ring the buzzer. Everybody would hear it upstairs, and they knew when that buzzed, it meant the committee was there. Even my customers would grab the waiters, sit them down, take the apron, put the apron on, and start serving.
My gosh.
We did that for years.
Wow.
So it was fun having it.
I believe that. Incredible. But there's a little bit of a bigger picture here though as well, and that is, of course, gay life, not just in Jordan, but in the Arabic world. You've mentioned Arabic sexual fluidity and that homophobia comes from abroad. Please explain what you mean.
And I say that with no finger pointing. It's just by default.
Yes.
And this is where it brings me to other subjects like the global north versus the global south. Cultures are different, and people need to approach the same issue in a different way depending on the context. Like for us as Arabs, you come to Jordan or the Arab world, and I'll just talk about Jordan in particular. You will see men holding hands.
Yes.
You will see women holding hands. You will see, how we, if we look a few seconds longer, if eyes lock a few seconds longer than normal, we would think that's a cruise, right? And someone's cruising. But no, for us, it's respect. So everybody looks in the eye.
Okay.
This look is very important. So culturally, we're allowed, part of our culture, we are physically close. When I'm talking to if I have a friend, a male friend, regardless of sexuality, if I have a male friend and our faces would be like this, and no one would say anything. Our hands would be over each other's shoulders, put his head on my shoulder, I'd put my head on their shoulder. We'd sleep in the same bed. I mean, I remember, my dad walking in and seeing us sleeping in the same bed, me and friends, and he'd whisper to mom, look at this friendship, how beautiful it is, and that's how we are. We are very, very physical people. We kiss every time we see each other. We hug every time we see each other. There's no such thing as sitting next to each other. We're always somewhat.
I see. I see.
So physically, we're there, and what we see, what here in the West you call bromances.
Yes.
We have that all the time. We've always had it, but our bromances go further. So a lot of people have actually has had some sort of intimacy with the same sex only because culture allows it, and it's not called anything.
Fascinating.
And I always say, and I always give this example where when I was still in high school, I was in love with someone, and I was with that person for a couple of years. I mean, it was my first love, and
okay.
And then I came to university in the US, and he went to another university, and a year later or 2 years later, we meet up and we're in the car driving, cruising along in Kuwait. And he's asking me, so how are the girls in America? But what girls? He says, well, are you having sex? What are the girls like? And I'm saying, I'm not having sex with girls. I'm not, no. And he's, why not? And I said, well, I'm gay. Well, because I'm gay. And he's in shock.
Wow.
So, what do you mean you're gay? And I tell him, well, what were we doing? He's like, no, I'm not gay. I loved you. And that's the fluidity I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure he's never fantasized another man in his life or ever will. He just happened to have fallen in love because there were no barriers. Because really, in actuality, I really believe that we are born and conditioned to be heterosexual.
Okay.
And not the other way around.
Yeah. Why not? I mean, it makes sense.
Because sexuality is fluid.
But building on that, excuse me, there's a lot of, let me rephrase. I hear people say that there's no LGBTQ freedom in Arabic society. You've explained something, though, that puts a different light on that, and that is that the Jordanians will secure freedom for LGBTQ folk in their own way. What do you mean?
Um, well, it starts with it means that there's a context to everywhere you go. Um, in the North, the global North, the Western world, we had to dissect sexuality. We had to, put everything into shelves. There's a homosexual, there's the bisexual, there's the heterosexual, there's the transgender. We had to dissect everything. Very important. But after going through that whole exercise, we came to fluidity. It's like, you know what? But there's also fluidity, and that plays a big part.
Yes.
And when we went through, I mean, I was in San Francisco when we started our first Pride marches between there and New York, which were ultimately extended over across the ocean to Europe,
Yes.
and how we fought for our rights here in the US. So there was a process doing that.
Yes.
So to bring that suddenly to the Arab world and say, we're going to do it exactly the same way, it doesn't work.
Right.
Because for us, it was only, in 2010, where that we realized we all met in Copenhagen for the what was it at that time? It was the Gay Olympics, and it was a human rights conference at the same time. We were invited, a few of us from a few countries. We thought there was about 20 of us. We arrived at the town hall for the big meeting on LGBT and discovered that there were about 100 and something of us.
Oh, wow. Okay.
From the Middle East, North Africa. And then when we all got together, we were very excited. We got together, started to talk, and we realized we didn't even have a vocabulary.
This was my next question. Exactly.
And they're tied because to reach, when I say the global South versus the global North, there's a certain speed. In the West, we've reached a lot of our goals, and we have the language and the vocabulary. In the Arab world, we didn't even have a vocabulary until a few years ago.
See, that is just incredible to me.
So we sat down, 9 of us sat down, put together a quick vocabulary, dispersed it, just so we could start speaking on, respect, with decency, not using derogatory terms, because we were labeled all sorts of derogatory labels.
Yes, yes.
So that was the process, coming up with a vocabulary, having a language, discussions, and then realizing that the differences that we had, that our challenges were different than the challenges in the West. Hence, the approach needs to be different.
Sure, yes.
And that's what I mean by, the global South versus the global North, and about context. The challenges are very different. We were going through Islamism. Islamism being politicized Islam, a politicized religion, which is now crumbling. Now we have a little more leeway to have discussions. It's like the Dark Ages in Europe, with Christianity, and every religion went through it.
Yeah.
And a lot of social blocks were there. And that's what we were going through. And now it's our turn to start progressing.
But I want to build on a little piece of the developing of the common language for LGBTQ things, because there's another piece that's fascinating, and that is the Netherlands, the government of the Netherlands, hired you, engaged you to promote that. How incredible must that have been?
They have been amazing. And it wasn't hired me, they hired us.
Oh, I see.
Not even hired. They actually, they gave us money to go out to different countries in the Middle East, and to different countries worldwide. We targeted human rights conferences, and we would go to those conferences that had translators.
Okay.
So basically the larger ones. And we would sit there and wait for the translator to use the derogatory terms to describe the LGBT communities in the Middle East. And the moment someone would use it, we'd, in the middle of the, plenary, it was like, excuse me, my name is so. I'm a gay man from Jordan. I didn't come here to a human rights conference to be called, and I would use the bad word. And of course, they'd call in the poor, the interpreter, and he'd say, he'd claim that these are the only words he had, and we'd pull out the piece of paper, the glossary, and say, well, this is it. So there were quite a few of us doing
Yeah.
that. So it didn't take very long. Within a few years, that glossary and vocabulary was dispersed. And this was all thanks to HIVOS at that time,
Wow.
an organization, yeah, in the Netherlands. They are also the ones who funded our our network conferences.
Oh,
Because when we realized we were that many, we organized bar camps in Turkey 5 years in a row. We'd be around 75 of us.
hmm.
We'd invite people, LGBT people from Middle East, North Africa, and some from Europe and America and Australasia.
Hmm.
And we would talk about all sorts of issues and how we can all come together and move forward. That was all through HIVOS as well from the Netherlands.
Fascinatingly, you've also written a book that I think the international audience would greatly benefit to read. Tell us about that.
Sure. Yes. It's a book. The title of the book is "Are You This or Are You This?" And it has a lot to do with the identity crisis that I was going through. Um, and although it's a memoir, but it's all short stories, but all depicting different ways that I struggled to gain the confidence of being who I am, and
Yes.
also what I faced being so the intersectionality, which is a very big word now, being so intersectional when it comes to my identity. And it's really interesting and funny because it's a very lightly written. It's very light and humorous because I thought this was co-written with a friend of mine, Ellen, and Ellen is Cypriot Greek, born and raised in London, and she was working at the library, the library in the School of Architecture in Oklahoma when I first went there. And
Oh,
she just
wow.
adopted me. She was older than me. She adopted me. I was this 15-year-old little twink, and she totally took me in. So this was
Okay.
co-written with her.
Now,
And
oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Do I correctly remember you said it is not available in Jordan, but internationally? Is that
It
right?
is. It's not available in the whole of the Middle East.
Okay.
It's censored because it's not considered of tradition. As I was talking about earlier, how bylaws
Yes.
can kick you in the butt, and this is one of them, where my book is censored. But it doesn't mean people are not ordering it and not they're ordering it and it's being mailed in and they're reading it. In fact, to my surprise, somebody took a photo the other day in Kuwait, in a bookshop
Uh,
in Kuwait. There's like a stack of it, and they were coming in every day. Within 5 days, they were all gone.
where can people buy this book, if
It's
internationally?
it's on Amazon. It's on
Oh,
Amazon. And it's published in the UK. It's London Publishing.
okay.
It's Hearst Publishers. But Oxford University Press here in the US distributes it. But it's in more than one place. It's not just Amazon. It's here in the US. I know some bookshops in New York, in San Francisco. They're around. I mean, I
Okay.
get emails and messages from people in like the other day from Seattle where she picked up a book. So they're easily, and it's also on Kindle, so you
Oh,
can do
okay.
that.
Fantastic. There you go, everyone. You know where to find it. Now, I'd love to know what have been your greatest achievements with Books at Cafe?
You know, I'm trying to be humble here. It's um, I think Books at Cafe opened the doors to our freedoms in the Middle East.
I would
It's
agree.
and that's thanks to the laws in Jordan, mostly because nobody came down on me, and arrested me. I was given some leeway, and it was and because it was one of the first places where everybody, it didn't just talk about homosexuality. We were about equality. And that's the strategy that we had. If I can't talk directly and say I'm gay, I would, it's you broaden it out like anywhere else. The strategy everywhere else, we'll talk about equality in general. We'll talk we'll take that attitude. And I took that attitude at Bookshop Cafe, and I became the fighter for and the activist for many subjects other than LGBT. And I think that's what made it rise. But also, I think it's very important. I went by the rules of society. So I didn't, even though this was a taboo subject, and I pushed the envelopes, but I pushed it in a way, and Bookshop Cafe pushed it in a way where it still maintained the respect of the community and the society around us. And that's how we survived.
Fascinating. Incredible, actually. Absolutely amazing. Now, building on that slightly, there will be people worldwide who will see this interview. They'll hear about Jordan for the first time. What advice can you offer anybody, Jordanian people, whomever happens to be there, seeking a place for themselves in Arabic culture, LGBTQ people, rather?
It's a little complex because most of the Arabs are somewhat displaced. So just like I was displaced and had to grow up and live in different cultures, and a chunk of it is the West, between the UK and the US being the West. Yes, it's very, very different, very liberal, very open in terms of culture than the Arab culture. But when you come home, or when you come to Jordan, it's Jordan. And everything, even mathematics, is about context. You work with your context, you go far. At the end of the day, I am Palestinian, Jordanian. I live in Jordan. I live under Jordanian rules and laws and culture, whom I love. I mean, I just love being in Jordan. I honestly wouldn't live anywhere else. And if I want to maintain that, then I need to respect everything and everybody around me.
Yes.
And I think once you show respect, you will get respect, regardless of whether, and this is what I keep hearing, like, I don't quite understand, but I love you and I respect you. That's a great place to start.
Wow.
And that's what I say, because at the end of the day, for all Jordanians who are coming back to Jordan, you are Jordanian. We've taken a lot from the West. We've learned a lot from the West, and we carry a lot from the West. And I think we need to be smart on how to apply that in Jordan as Jordanians, and it should be no problem.
Wow. Whole sections of society need to hear you say that.
Thank you.
But how do you want to be remembered by your community?
It's a tough one. Just someone who tried. I did my best. And I do my best. And I've learned in easy ways and difficult ways that to get respect, you need to respect.
That's true.
Against all odds. And that's how I want to be remembered, that I did not achieve this. I did not achieve the good life that I live without the difficulties. It didn't come easy, but I think it's because I maintained, I got my self-respect, and I got the respect of others by being respectful to society and to the context that I'm in. It didn't come easy. It wasn't easy. Easier said than done, but
Absolutely.
That's what I want to be remembered by.
I shall remember you as a humble man for saying these things.
Thank you.
Honestly. But the big question with which I always conclude an interview, what's the biggest misconception about you?
Everybody thinks I'm strong. Everybody thinks, this guy is a tough cookie. He's strong. Look what he did. And then, and when someone says that about you, it strips you. Well, it puts you in more than one place. One, you become untouchable to many. In their own heads, they think that, just because I'm successful and I'm strong or appear strong, that I'm not a human on the inside. I'm soft, I fall, I break, I cry. I don't cry, I'm just not good at it. But I'm breakable easily. I'm easily breakable, like anybody else. But that image that people have sometimes alienates you. And that's what I'd like to say, that I'm just as human as anybody else. I only look strong because I fought to get here. But I'm a little softy across the whole time. My whole journey, I've always been a softy, just wanting to be accepted and wanting to be loved. And, that's it.
Well, Madian Al Jazerah, I don't know how to thank you enough for this incredible interview with Inside Leather History, a Fireside Chat. This has been a privilege, and I have done nothing but learn wonderful things.
The privilege is absolutely mine. Thank you.
And what a fortuitous sequence of events that brought this to happen. I just find it incredible.
It's a beautiful world.
So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. The very first interview from the Middle East with Inside Leather History, a Fireside Chat.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, check out the Fireside Chat channel for more chapters in the history of leather. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe.